Wednesday, March 18, 2009. For Claudia Elizabeth Lawrence, it began in the familiar way it had for years, quiet, ordinary, and seemingly predictable. At 35, Claudia lived alone in a modest two-bedroom terrace on Haworth Road, a short walk from York City walls. Her life was orderly in some respects, yet it had its own complicated edges. She worked as a chef at the University of York's Goodricke College, an early start role that kept her in routine. Her home was her own, a place she had bought after saving carefully, decorating with the neatness of someone who liked control over her environment. That morning she rose early. The shift pattern that week meant she was starting mid-morning rather than pre-dawn. CCTV from the university campus later confirmed her arrival at work on her bicycle. Her colleagues recalled nothing unusual about her mood. She completed her shift, left around 2:30 p.m., and cycled home along the same route she always took. 3 miles of familiar streets where, in theory, nothing should happen to a person in broad daylight. At some point that afternoon, she swapped her chef's whites for casual clothes. A neighbor later recalled seeing her outside the front of her house, leaning against the garden wall, talking briefly to someone. The detail vague, the exact time uncertain. That evening, Claudia prepared a simple meal. She made a phone call to her mother, Joan, at 8:20 p.m. They spoke for about 8 minutes. Joan later said her daughter sounded normal, chatty, making plans for the weekend. It was the kind of conversation that leaves no trace of alarm. Around that same time, Claudia sent several text messages. One to a friend, arranging to meet for a drink that Saturday. Another to a man she had met on holiday in Cyprus, with whom she maintained occasional contact. The last confirmed text left her phone at 8:23 p.m. Casual, brief, unremarkable. After that point, Claudia is no longer verifiably seen or heard from again. No calls, no texts, no social media. The official version is simple. At some moment between 8:23 p.m. on March 18th and the early hours of the next morning, something happened to Claudia Lawrence that would remove her entirely from her own life. What is missing is everything in between. The hours that followed, the movements inside and outside her home, and any trace of who, if anyone, came to her door that night. The next confirmed point in the timeline is not until the following morning, Thursday, March 19th. And it begins not with Claudia herself, but with silence. Her phone does not register any outgoing calls or texts after the night before. No one sees her leave for work. No CCTV captures her along her regular route to the university. Her colleagues at Goodricke College remember expecting her at her usual start time of 6 a.m., a job that required her to be up well before dawn, cycling the quiet roads in near darkness. By 6:10, she was late. That, by itself, was unusual. Claudia was known to be punctual, the sort of punctual that chefs rely on because the kitchen can't function without everyone in place. By 6:30, she still hadn't arrived. There was no phone call to explain her absence, no message sent to a colleague. The morning rush carried on without her. At 9 a.m., her phone, still switched on, connected briefly to the local mast at the university. But the signal was faint, a single fleeting interaction with the network, before it stopped responding entirely. Later analysis would show that the handset was either switched off manually or its battery removed sometime after that. The significance of that 9 a.m. ping is debated. Was it Claudia herself, phone in hand, moving somewhere in York? Or was it someone else carrying her phone, deliberately or otherwise, past a location where it connected momentarily before being silenced? Back on Haworth Road, neighbors noticed nothing out of place. There were no sounds in the night, no raised voices, no visible disturbance. Claudia's car was parked outside as usual. Her bicycle, her main mode of transport, was nowhere to be seen. At 12 p.m., her father, Peter Lawrence, tried calling her. It went straight to voicemail. He assumed she was at work. It wasn't until the evening that the concern began to grow. Claudia had made plans to meet a friend for a drink after work that day. She never arrived. She didn't call to cancel. Messages went unanswered. And still, nobody yet knew that a very narrow, very dangerous window of time had already passed. A window in which Claudia Lawrence could have vanished without a trace. It was Friday, March 20th, when the absence could no longer be explained away. 2 consecutive days without a word from Claudia was unheard of. Her friend, Susie Cooper, had expected to see her Thursday night for drinks. When Claudia failed to appear and didn't respond to messages, Susie assumed at first there'd been a mix-up. But by the next morning, with calls still going straight to voicemail, concern turned into a steady unease. Susie drove to Haworth Road. Claudia's small terraced house looked exactly as it always did from the outside. The front door was locked. Her car was parked neatly in its usual space. There was no sign of forced entry. She tried knocking, then calling out through the letterbox. Nothing. Through the kitchen window, she could see dishes draining by the sink, a single cup, a plate, and her handbag hanging from the back of a chair. Inside, the house was strangely still. Later, police would note the kettle had water in it, as if it had been filled but never boiled. There was washing up done, bed neatly made. Her chef's whites, which she should have been wearing for her Thursday shift, were nowhere to be found. Nor was her rucksack or her mobile phone. By early afternoon, Susie called Peter Lawrence. He had not heard from his daughter either. Peter made the 25-mile drive from his home in Slingsby to York. Upon arrival, he used his spare key to let himself in. He found the same scene Susie had glimpsed. A home frozen in time, no signs of a struggle, no obvious explanation. Peter contacted North Yorkshire Police. At first, the matter was logged as a concern for welfare, the kind of case where officers expect the person will return of their own accord. Claudia was, after all, an adult with no known health issues. But within hours, the tone shifted. The total lack of financial activity, the dead mobile phone, the uncollected wages, these were not the markers of a voluntary disappearance. By evening, uniformed officers were going door to door along Haworth Road. They asked neighbors to recall anything from the past 2 days: unusual visitors, strange cars, any movement in or out of Claudia's home. Most had nothing to offer, but one resident, whose kitchen window overlooked a narrow alley behind the terrace, hesitated. She thought, though she couldn't be sure, that she had heard raised voices in the early hours of Thursday morning. Male and female, short, sharp, and then silence. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it would soon become one of the small, disquieting fragments the investigation would have to contend with. By the weekend of 21 to 22 March, the case had shifted from a missing person inquiry to a suspected abduction. The word murder was not yet used publicly, but behind closed doors, detectives were already treating it as the most likely outcome. North Yorkshire Police set up a dedicated incident room. The first priority was to map Claudia's final known movements with precision. They began with the last confirmed sighting: CCTV from the University of York, showing her cycling away from work just after 2:30 p.m. on March 18th. From there, the trail became hazy. Officers canvassed the length of Haworth Road, collecting hours of CCTV footage from shops, pubs, and private homes. Most of it showed nothing, just the ordinary rhythm of the street. But there were anomalies. At 7:15 p.m. on the evening of the 18th, a local CCTV camera picked up an image of a man walking along Haworth Road in the direction of Claudia's house. His identity was unknown. Later, at 5:42 a.m. on the morning of the 19th, the day she failed to show for work, another man was captured walking away from the area. His clothing was dark, his features partly obscured. Police released both images to the public, appealing for the men to come forward. Neither did. Then there was the phone data. Records confirmed the last outgoing message from Claudia's handset at 8:23 p.m. on the 18th. After that, only network activity, no voice, no text. At 9:12 a.m. on the 19th, the phone briefly connected to a mast serving the A64, a major road running east of York towards Malton and Scarborough. The signal was short-lived, and the phone went dead immediately afterwards. Detectives searched the route on foot and by vehicle, hoping to locate the device. Nothing was found. Inside her house, forensic teams looked for any sign of a break-in, struggle, or cleanup. They found none. The absence of physical evidence became a problem in itself. If Claudia had been taken from her home, the person responsible had left almost nothing behind. A Attention then turned to her personal life. Friends and colleagues described her as independent, sociable, and fiercely private about certain relationships. She was known to have several male friends, some of them married. There were whispers of brief affairs, though none confirmed. The police did not dismiss these as gossip. They began working through every man in her social circle, past partners, colleagues, acquaintances, and almost immediately they found resistance. One man declined to give a formal statement, insisting he had nothing to do with her disappearance. Another failed to answer repeated police calls. A third was out of the country. None were charged, but each was kept in the frame. The deeper the investigators dug, the more they encountered half-truths, contradictions, and reluctance. In the absence of a crime scene, the case was becoming a battle of information, and someone somewhere was holding back. By early April 2009, Claudia Lawrence's disappearance had moved from a local news story to a national mystery. Posters with her face, bright smile, long dark hair, were in shop windows, on lampposts, and at bus stops across York. Her father, Peter, appeared on television repeatedly, urging anyone with information to come forward. Behind the scenes, the police were drawing up lists. Not just one, but several, each a different category. Known associates, romantic connections, people who had worked with her, people who had seen her on the 18th. Anyone whose alibi for that night or the early hours of the 19th was vague, uncorroborated, or unverifiable. One man, an ex-boyfriend, told police he hadn't seen her in weeks. Another, a colleague from the university kitchens, claimed he barely knew her socially. Yet texts recovered from her phone suggested otherwise. These inconsistencies weren't enough for an arrest, but they kept the investigative spotlight fixed. In the pubs and coffee shops of York, speculation ran ahead of fact. Some said Claudia had been seeing a married man who feared exposure. Others believed she had stumbled into something criminal, overhearing or witnessing something that made her a target. A smaller number floated the idea of a stranger abduction, though detectives saw this as less likely. Then came the first significant break, or what appeared to be one. A woman living on Haworth Road told police she had seen a man loitering near Claudia's house in the days before she vanished. He was described as in his late 20s to early 30s, with short dark hair, wearing a dark jacket. He was smoking, hands deep in his pockets, as though waiting. He had no obvious reason to be there. The police compared this description to the unidentified man caught on CCTV at 7:15 p.m. on the 18th. The similarities were enough to fuel a working theory that Claudia may have arranged to meet someone that night, possibly outside her home, and that this meeting had gone wrong. In May 2009, detectives publicly appealed for 4 specific men to come forward, all believed to have been in contact with Claudia in the days before she disappeared. None were named in the press at the time. None, the police said, were being treated as suspects, but each had information that could help. Not one of them came forward. This reluctance or refusal to cooperate frustrated investigators. Without statements, timelines could not be confirmed, and phone records alone could only place people in general areas. The police began to suspect a pact of silence, whether out of fear, loyalty, or self-preservation. In public, the case was still framed as missing person, high risk. In private, senior officers were now convinced Claudia had been murdered. The difficulty was proving it and finding the person responsible. As weeks turned into months, the physical search for Claudia slowed, but the investigation did not. North Yorkshire Police continued to interview friends, neighbors, and colleagues, recheck CCTV footage, and reanalyze phone data. But without a body, without forensic evidence, the case was trapped in a strange limbo. In 2013, 4 years after Claudia vanished, the Major Crime Unit took over. New forensic techniques were applied to items from her home. The results were inconclusive. No blood, no definitive trace of an intruder. Then, in March 2015, a dramatic development. 5 men, all in their 50s, were arrested on suspicion of murder. Each was from the York area and known to Claudia socially. For a moment, it looked like the silence might break. But within months, The Crown Prosecution Service announced there was insufficient evidence to charge any of them. All were released without trial. The families of those men protested their innocence. For Peter Lawrence, it was a crushing setback. Publicly, he urged the men to speak to police, to look into their hearts and give whatever information they had. But the silence continued. Another arrest followed in 2016, this time of a man in his 50s from York. He too was released without charge. By now, some members of the public were beginning to question the investigation itself, whether it had focused too heavily on Claudia's personal life and overlooked other possibilities. Police stood by their approach. They believed she had been killed by someone she knew. The problem was proving which one. In 2019, on the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, detectives again appealed for the public's help. They re-released the CCTV images of the two unidentified men from March 2009 and asked for any new information, however small. It brought in dozens of calls, but no breakthrough. By this time, Peter Lawrence had become a tireless campaigner for the families of missing people. His efforts contributed to the passage of Claudia's Law, allowing relatives of missing persons to manage their legal affairs after 90 days, rather than waiting 7 years. Peter never gave up hope of answers, but in February 2021, he died aged 74, still not knowing what happened to his daughter. The case remains officially open. In 2021, North Yorkshire Police confirmed they had conducted fresh searches in land and woodland near York, based on new information. Nothing was found. As of today, no one has been charged. Claudia Lawrence's body has never been found. What remains are fragments: 2 unidentified men on grainy CCTV, a dead phone pinging briefly near the A64, neighbors hearing raised voices in the dark, and a silence that has lasted for more than 16 years. For investigators, it is a case defined as much by what is missing as by what is known. And for those who knew her, the absence is still an open wound. If you have any information about the disappearance of Claudia Lawrence, please contact North Yorkshire Police on 101 or Crimestoppers anonymously on 0800 555 111. For the families of the missing, the wait never ends, and neither should the search for the truth. This is Trace of Evil, where shadows live and the truth never stays buried forever.